We live in a world where logic is often exalted as the highest form of understanding, the ultimate tool for navigating our complex existence. We're taught to prize rationality, to rely on reason as the cornerstone of our decision-making, and to reject anything that cannot be explained in terms of cold, hard facts. But is this reliance on logic truly the key to uncovering the deepest truths about ourselves and the world around us? Or does it come with hidden dangers that we are unwilling to acknowledge? Imagine a world governed entirely by logic, no room for intuition, no place for emotion. Every action and thought is calculated, every decision made based on what is most rational in the eyes of a cold, calculating mind. In such a world, would we find happiness, meaning, or connection, or would we instead find a hollow existence, devoid of the richness that emotion and instinct provide? The problem is not that logic is unimportant, it's essential even. It allows us to make sense of the world, to predict outcomes, and to control our environment. However, when we elevate reason above all else, when we place it on a pedestal and treat it as the only valid form of knowledge, we lose something profound in the process, something intangible, yet essential: our humanity. Take, for example, the famous philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, whose work we'll explore in depth. Schopenhauer argued that the more we detach ourselves from the emotional and instinctual aspects of our existence in favor of pure rationality, the further we drift from what it truly means to be alive. He believed that human beings, at their core, are not simply creatures of logic. We are creatures of desire, of will, and of emotion, forces that cannot be understood or contained by reason alone. In this documentary, we will dive deep into the dangers of over-relying on logic, exploring how an excessive focus on reason can disconnect us from the deeper, more primal aspects of human experience. We'll examine Schopenhauer's critique of pure reason and his belief that understanding the world requires embracing not just the intellect, but also the heart and the will. Along the way, we'll see how modern society, in its obsession with logic, has created an environment where we are increasingly disconnected from the emotional and psychological forces that shape our lives. Ultimately, we will ask, can a life built on pure logic truly lead to fulfillment? Or are we, in our blind pursuit of reason, overlooking the most important parts of the human experience? In order to understand Schopenhauer's critique of reason, we must first turn to the work of Immanuel Kant, whose philosophy laid the groundwork for Schopenhauer's own thinking. Kant, writing in the 18th century, argued that our understanding of the world is shaped not by the world itself, but by the way our minds filter and interpret reality. According to Kant, we can never truly know things as they are in themselves, what he called the noumenon. Instead, we are confined to knowing only the way things appear to us, the phenomenon. For Kant, this was a revolutionary idea. The mind was not a passive receiver of external stimuli, but an active participant in shaping how we perceive the world. His theory of knowledge focused on the structures of the human mind: time, space, and causality as the essential categories through which we experience reality. These categories, according to Kant, are built into the very structure of our minds, and thus, we cannot perceive the world in any other way. But Schopenhauer, despite his initial admiration for Kant, found one critical flaw in Kant's system. Schopenhauer agreed with Kant that human beings could never know the noumenon, the thing in itself, but Schopenhauer went further. He argued that Kant's emphasis on reason, on the mind, as the ultimate filter of experience, created a false sense of clarity and certainty. Schopenhauer believed that reason, in its attempt to impose order on the chaotic flux of life, obscured more than it revealed. Schopenhauer's critique of Kant is anchored in his own philosophical project, one that sought to reveal the underlying forces of existence that cannot be captured by reason alone. At the heart of Schopenhauer's thought is the concept of the will. While Kant's philosophy viewed the mind as the ultimate organizer of experience, Schopenhauer's philosophy turned inward to the irrational, primal forces that he believed govern all existence. To Schopenhauer, reason was a mere servant to the will. While reason might provide us with useful tools for navigating the world, calculating how to achieve our desires, for example, it could never uncover the root of our desires themselves. Reason could not touch the fundamental nature of life, which, according to Schopenhauer, was driven by the will to live, an insatiable, blind force that underpins all phenomena. For Schopenhauer, human beings are not primarily creatures of reason, we are creatures of will. Reason is a tool, a means by which the will seeks to fulfill its desires, but it is the will itself, not reason, that drives us forward, that propels us through life with an endless yearning. Our rational minds may convince us that we are in control, that we are logical, that we make decisions based on reason, but in truth, it is the will that controls us. Reason, in Schopenhauer's view, is but a mask for the deeper, irrational forces at play. Consider, for example, the concept of human desire. Kant's view of desire was that it could be understood through reason, that we could rationally analyze and categorize our desires, assessing whether they were worth pursuing or not. But Schopenhauer rejected this rational analysis. To him, desire was not something that could be understood through logic. Desire was an irrational, uncontrollable force. We desire not because it makes sense, but because the will drives us to do so. Whether it is the desire for food, sex, power, or wealth, these desires are not the products of reason. They are the expressions of an underlying, primal force that reason cannot comprehend. Schopenhauer's critique of pure reason is not just philosophical, it's deeply psychological. The more we rely on reason, Schopenhauer suggests, the more we distance ourselves from the raw, vital forces that actually shape our lives. Reason, for all its intellectual brilliance, is a tool for the surface-level management of our desires and actions, but it cannot illuminate the deeper truths of existence. It cannot explain why we desire what we do, or why we sometimes find ourselves driven by impulses and compulsions that make no logical sense. Reason cannot grasp the underlying will that shapes our very being. This idea of the will is not just a metaphysical concept for Schopenhauer. It has profound consequences for how we understand human suffering. For Schopenhauer, suffering is an inherent part of life because the will is insatiable. The will never rests, never reaches a state of fulfillment. We desire, we strive, and when one desire is satisfied, another takes its place. The quest for satisfaction is endless, and thus, suffering is built into the very fabric of existence. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism, which similarly views desire as a source of suffering. The more we chase after fulfillment, the more we find ourselves trapped in a cycle of endless striving, never reaching the satisfaction we seek. This is the tragedy of the human condition. We are driven by the will, but the very thing that drives us, the will, is also the source of our suffering. This brings us back to the critique of reason. Reason, by focusing solely on the surface-level aspects of life, on what can be measured, calculated, and understood, cannot reach the core of this suffering. It cannot explain the deep, existential yearning that plagues human existence. Reason may tell us how to get from point A to point B, but it cannot answer why we are so deeply dissatisfied with the journey. It cannot show us how to escape the grip of the will, or how to find peace in the midst of our endless striving. Schopenhauer's philosophy, then, is not just a critique of rationalism in a theoretical sense. It is a critique of the way in which modern society elevates reason above all else, and in doing so, forgets the deeper, more emotional, and more irrational aspects of life that shape our experience. In a world obsessed with logic and control, we are increasingly disconnected from the forces that truly drive us, the forces of desire, of will, and of suffering. And in this disconnect, we lose sight of the most profound truths about what it means to be human. At first glance, rationality seems like a simple, straightforward concept. We're taught from an early age that logic is the key to understanding the world, an objective, neutral tool to guide our thoughts and actions. But the truth is far more complicated. Rationality is not just a mechanical process of reason. It is deeply influenced by psychological factors that shape the way we interpret information, make decisions, and perceive reality. Our minds, though capable of extraordinary feats of reasoning, are not designed to be purely logical. In fact, they are far more attuned to emotions, biases, and shortcuts that can distort our understanding of the world. What we call rationality is often an illusion. shaped by a variety of cognitive biases that skew our thinking in ways we may not even be aware of. The human mind evolved to prioritize survival, not truth. As a result, many of the mental shortcuts we use, what psychologists call heuristics, are designed to help us navigate the world quickly and efficiently, even if they sometimes lead to errors in judgment. While these heuristics can be useful in many situations, they also introduce systematic biases that compromise our ability to think logically. Take, for example, the confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. This bias doesn't just affect our opinions on trivial matters. It influences how we perceive political ideologies, social issues, and even the scientific truths that govern our lives. Once we form a belief, we become blind to evidence that contradicts it, filtering out anything that doesn't fit into our worldview. This bias is so powerful that even when confronted with overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we cling to our original beliefs, reinforcing our sense of certainty and control. Confirmation bias isn't limited to personal opinions. It's a pervasive force in human society. Think of the way political ideologies shape our perceptions of the world. In today's polarized environment, people are more likely than ever to consume media that aligns with their beliefs, reinforcing the echo chambers in which they reside. In these spaces, reason is not used to examine facts objectively. It is employed as a tool to support one's identity and worldview. Logic becomes a weapon, not a bridge to truth. Another powerful cognitive bias is the availability heuristic, which leads us to judge the probability of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. If we are constantly bombarded with stories of plane crashes in the media, for instance, we might begin to overestimate the likelihood of a crash, despite the fact that flying is statistically much safer than driving. Our minds latch onto dramatic, emotionally charged events because they are easier to recall, even if they are rare or unlikely. This skewed perception of reality can lead us to make irrational decisions, all in the name of logic. Even more insidious is the anchoring bias, the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we encounter when making decisions. Studies have shown that people will make significantly different judgments depending on the initial anchor they are presented with, even if that anchor is completely irrelevant. For example, if you are shown a high price tag for a product, you are more likely to consider a subsequent, lower price as a good deal, even if it's still overpriced. Rationality, in this case, is not the result of careful thought, but of the mind's tendency to latch onto arbitrary reference points, distorting our sense of value and reason. These cognitive biases are just a few examples of how human reasoning is influenced by psychological factors that distort our perceptions. They remind us that the idea of objective rationality is, at best, an illusion. In reality, our minds are subject to a web of influences that shape how we interpret the world, how we evaluate evidence, and how we make decisions. And in many cases, these influences work against our ability to think logically. Schopenhauer's critique of pure reason becomes even more compelling when we consider the role of emotion in shaping human decisions. Emotions, far from being the antithesis of reason, play a crucial role in our rationality. The mind doesn't separate emotion and logic as neatly as we would like to believe. In fact, many psychological studies suggest that emotion is essential for making decisions. Without emotion, we would be unable to assign value to anything, and our reasoning would be devoid of direction or purpose. In the 1990s, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio conducted a series of groundbreaking studies on patients who had suffered damage to the emotional centers of their brains. These patients were able to reason logically, but struggled to make decisions in everyday life. They could list pros and cons, weigh options, and understand the consequences of their actions, but they could not choose between them. Without the emotional impulse to guide them, their decision-making abilities were paralyzed. This insight challenges the traditional view that emotions are a hindrance to rational thought. Instead, emotions appear to be deeply intertwined with our reasoning processes, helping to provide context and meaning to the facts we analyze. This connection between emotion and logic becomes even clearer when we consider how emotions shape our perceptions of truth. When we encounter a situation that threatens our sense of identity or worldview, our emotional reactions can override our logical reasoning. This phenomenon is especially evident in the realm of social and political issues where deeply held beliefs are often tied to our sense of self-worth and belonging. In such cases, our desire to be right or to protect our identity can cloud our judgment, pushing us to embrace irrational beliefs and reject inconvenient truths. History is full of examples where emotion and bias have distorted our sense of reason. Think about the rise of propaganda during the 20th century. Totalitarian regimes, from Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union, understood the power of emotional appeal. They didn't just rely on logical arguments to persuade the masses. They stoked fear, anger, and hatred to manipulate public opinion. Logic alone is insufficient to move people. Emotions, particularly fear and desire, are often the driving forces behind mass movements. In this sense, the line between rationality and manipulation becomes incredibly thin. What we perceive as rational thinking is often shaped by forces we don't fully understand, forces that rely on our emotions and biases to influence our actions. Even in the modern age, with all our advances in knowledge and technology, we are still susceptible to these cognitive biases. The rise of social media, with its endless stream of information and emotionally charged content, has made it even harder to escape the grip of irrational thinking. Algorithms are designed to amplify content that engages us emotionally, ensuring that we are constantly bombarded with information that confirms our biases. This creates a feedback loop that distorts our perception of reality, leaving us more entrenched in our beliefs and less able to think critically. At its core, the problem with rationality is not that it's inherently flawed, but that it is often subverted by psychological forces beyond our control. Our minds are not as objective and neutral as we would like to believe. Instead, they are shaped by emotions, biases, and cognitive shortcuts that distort our perception of the world. This is why Schopenhauer's critique of reason is so profound. Rationality, when disconnected from the deeper emotional and psychological forces that drive us, becomes a fragile and unreliable guide to truth. We might pride ourselves on our logical thinking, but the reality is that we are all subject to the same cognitive biases that shape our judgments and decisions. In the end, our so-called rationality is just a reflection of the complex interplay between logic, emotion, and unconscious bias, a far cry from the pure reason that we so often revere. The Enlightenment era, which spanned the late 17th and 18th centuries, marked the emergence of a new intellectual paradigm, one that placed reason at the center of human understanding. Philosophers, scientists, and political theorists began to argue that human progress depended on the application of reason and logic, challenging centuries of tradition, superstition, and dogma. The Enlightenment belief in rationality was rooted in the conviction that humans, through the use of reason, could uncover the underlying laws of nature, improve society, and even overcome the limitations imposed by religion and monarchy. Figures like René Descartes, John Locke, and Immanuel Kant were instrumental in shaping this intellectual movement. Descartes, often considered the father of modern philosophy, famously declared, "Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am," emphasizing the primacy of reason and the individual's capacity for independent thought. Descartes' method of doubt, in which he questioned everything that could possibly be doubted in order to find certain knowledge, exemplified the Enlightenment commitment to rational inquiry. John Locke's political philosophy, which emphasized the importance of individual liberty and the social contract, also contributed to the era's exaltation of reason. Locke argued that human beings are capable of understanding their natural rights through reason, and that government should be based on rational principles of justice and consent. Locke's influence would resonate throughout the centuries, shaping the foundations of modern democratic thought. Immanuel Kant, whose work was discussed earlier in this script, further advanced the Enlightenment idea of reason. Kant's critical philosophy suggested that reason was the framework through which we could access knowledge of the world, even if we could never know the world as it truly is. His emphasis on the autonomy of human reason shaped much of the intellectual landscape of the Enlightenment and laid the groundwork for future critiques of reason. However, as the Enlightenment ideals of reason and progress began to dominate the intellectual sphere, cracks began to appear in the rationalist vision of human nature. Philosophers and intellectuals started to question whether reason alone could explain the full scope of human experience. The intellectual landscape shifted dramatically during the 19th and 20th centuries, as movements and thinkers began to challenge the primacy of reason in understanding society, history, and human behavior. Romanticism, the rejection of pure rationality. The first major challenge to the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason came from the Romantic movement. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Romantic thinkers rejected the mechanistic worldview of the Enlightenment, arguing that reason alone could not account for the richness of human experience. The Romantics were deeply influenced by the idea that the imagination, emotion, and intuition played crucial roles in understanding the world. They were drawn to the irrational, the mystical, and the sublime, the things that could not be explained by logic or reason. Prominent figures like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, William Blake, and Friedrich Schiller embraced the irrational and the emotional aspects of human life. Goethe, for example, explored the limits of human reason in his novel Faust, where the protagonist makes a pact with the devil in a search for knowledge and fulfillment beyond the boundaries of rational thought. For the Romantics, reason was too restrictive and narrow. It failed to capture the complexity and depth of human experience. Instead, they argued that true understanding required a synthesis of reason and emotion, intellect and intuition. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most influential philosophers of the late 19th century, would go on to further critique the Enlightenment emphasis on reason. Nietzsche's philosophy is often seen as a radical departure from the rationalist tradition, as he argued that reason, in its purest form, was an expression of weakness and repression. Nietzsche's famous declaration that God is dead was a rejection of the rationalist belief in a divine order governing the universe. In its place, Nietzsche proposed the concept of the will to power, a fundamental life force that drives individuals to assert themselves and create meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose. Nietzsche's rejection of rationalism was part of a broader critique of the modern world. He believed that the Enlightenment's obsession with reason had led to a devaluation of life, reducing human beings to mere subjects of scientific and logical analysis. Nietzsche's call for a return to the beast within, the irrational, instinctual drives that constitute human nature, was a direct challenge to the rationalist tradition that dominated European thought. The birth of psychoanalysis, Freud, and the unconscious mind as the 19th century gave way to the 20th. The intellectual climate became increasingly skeptical of the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason. One of the most profound challenges to the primacy of reason came from the field of psychology, particularly through the work of Sigmund Freud. Freud's theory of the unconscious mind suggested that much of human behavior was driven by irrational forces beyond our conscious awareness. Freud's ideas revolutionized the way we think about human behavior. He argued that reason was only a small part of the story when it came to understanding why we act the way we do. The unconscious, Freud believed, was the repository of repressed desires, memories, and traumas that shaped our actions in ways we could not fully understand. In contrast to the Enlightenment's ideal of the rational, autonomous individual, Freud presented a more complex and darker picture of human nature, one in which much of our behavior was shaped by irrational, unconscious forces. Freud's work was foundational to the development of psychoanalysis and had a profound impact on both psychology and philosophy. His theories opened the door for further exploration into the irrational aspects of the human psyche and challenged the notion that reason was the supreme guide to understanding human nature. Freud's legacy was later taken up by figures like Carl Jung, who emphasized the importance of myth, archetypes, and the collective unconscious, further expanding our understanding of the irrational forces that shape human life. The rise of postmodernism, deconstructing reason. The 20th century also saw the rise of postmodernism, a philosophical movement that radically questioned the very idea of objective truth and universal reason. Postmodern thinkers like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Jean-François Lyotard argued that the Enlightenment project of rationality was inherently flawed because it assumed that truth could be discovered through objective reasoning. According to postmodernism, truth is not universal or absolute, but is shaped by cultural, historical, and social forces. Foucault, for example, examined how knowledge and power are intertwined, arguing that what we consider rational is often a reflection of the dominant power structures in society. He showed that what is considered rational or objective is not neutral, but is shaped by historical and political contexts. Derrida, through his concept of deconstruction, argued that all language is inherently unstable, and that meaning is always contingent, never fixed or absolute. For Derrida, reason itself is a product of language and is always subject to interpretation and distortion. In the postmodern era, reason was no longer seen as a stable foundation for knowledge. Instead, it was viewed as just one narrative among many, subject to interpretation and cultural conditioning. Postmodernism's critique of reason was particularly relevant in the context of power structures, where rational ideologies could be used to justify oppression and domination. The legacy of modern skepticism today. Modern skepticism continues to challenge the primacy of reason, especially in the context of contemporary society. The rise of populism, conspiracy theories, and the manipulation of information through media have all highlighted the limitations of reason. In addressing complex societal issues, in a world where misinformation spreads rapidly and political polarization runs deep, the very notion of objective truth is under attack. The internet, which was once hailed as a democratizing force for reason and rational discourse, has become a breeding ground for echo chambers, where individuals are more likely to embrace their pre-existing beliefs than engage in reasoned debate. Philosophers today continue to grapple with the legacy of the Enlightenment and its emphasis on reason. Some, like Jürgen Habermas, argue that reason remains an essential tool for democratic deliberation and social progress. Others, like Slavoj Žižek, question whether reason alone can address the fundamental contradictions of modern society. In the end, the evolution of rational thought from the Enlightenment to contemporary skepticism reveals a profound tension. On one hand, reason has been a powerful force for progress, science, and social change. On the other hand, it has been used to justify systems of oppression and to mask the irrational forces that shape human behavior. The question remains, can we ever fully rely on reason to understand ourselves and the world? Or must we, like Schopenhauer, acknowledge that there are deeper forces at play, forces that cannot be grasped by logic alone? In the modern world, we are constantly bombarded with information news stories, advertisements, political speeches, social media posts, and more. This information, which often claims to be based on rational argument and factual truth, is frequently shaped and manipulated to influence our opinions and behaviors. The line between logic and manipulation is often blurred, and what we believe to be rational decisions may, in reality, be deeply influenced by media forces, exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities. The idea that media operates purely on the basis of reason is an illusion. In truth, the media frequently uses emotional appeals, logical fallacies, and subtle forms of persuasion to manipulate public opinion. It exploits the very cognitive biases we've discussed earlier: the confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, and anchoring bias, all to create narratives that shape how we perceive the world. At its core, the media's influence on rationality is not just about presenting information, but about controlling how that information is framed, interpreted, and internalized. The role of media in shaping rational perception. The concept of rational choice is central to much of political and economic theory. The idea is that individuals, when making decisions, do so logically, weighing the costs and benefits to maximize their own advantage. But what happens when the information we rely on to make these decisions is filtered, manipulated, or distorted? When the choices presented to us are based not on an unbiased portrayal of reality, but on an agenda designed to influence our preferences, This is where the danger lies. The media, with its power to shape public discourse, plays a key role in constructing our sense of what is rational. It guides us in making choices, framing issues in ways that appeal to our emotions, fears, and desires. Politicians and corporations have long understood the power of media to shape public opinion. They know that the appeal to reason can be a potent tool, but more often than not, they rely on emotional appeals, logical fallacies, and selective framing to sway the masses. The power of emotional appeal, from fear to desire. One of the most effective ways in which media manipulates rationality is through emotional appeal. When we are emotionally engaged, we are less likely to think critically and more likely to react impulsively. Fear, in particular, is a powerful tool for manipulation. Throughout history, political regimes have used fear as a weapon to control populations, framing external threats or internal enemies as existential dangers that require urgent action. During the Cold War, for instance, the US government used the threat of communism to justify a variety of actions, from military interventions to domestic surveillance. The constant portrayal of communism as an imminent threat to freedom and democracy created an atmosphere of fear, one that made it easier to rally public support for policies that, upon closer inspection, might have been more about consolidating power than about protecting rational democratic principles. In the media, fear is often magnified through sensational headlines, dramatic visuals, and emotionally charged language. The portrayal of terrorist attacks, for example, is often accompanied by images of devastation, panic, and human suffering. While these images are undeniably powerful, they also distort our ability to think rationally about the issue at hand. They invoke an emotional response that, in many cases, leads to irrational decisions, such as the erosion of civil liberties in the name of national security. But fear isn't the only emotion that the media uses to manipulate public opinion. Desire and aspiration are equally potent tools. Advertisements, for example, are designed to exploit our deep-seated desires for wealth, status, beauty, and happiness. They craft narratives that promise fulfillment through consumption, linking the purchase of a product to the attainment of a higher status or a better life. This type of media manipulation is subtle, but it reinforces the idea that rational decision-making is not about evaluating real needs, but about fulfilling emotional desires. The use of logical fallacies, eroding rational discourse while emotional appeals are effective at swaying public opinion. The media also relies heavily on logical fallacies, flawed arguments that seem convincing, but are fundamentally unsound. One of the most common fallacies is the appeal to authority, in which an argument is deemed true simply because an expert or well-known figure says it is. This fallacy plays on the trust we place in authority figures and experts, but it leaves little room for critical analysis or skepticism. For example, consider how politicians often use endorsements from scientists or respected public figures to justify their positions on controversial issues such as climate change or public health policies. While the endorsement of a respected authority can lend credibility to an argument, it does not make that argument objectively true. The media can exploit this fallacy by presenting certain individuals or organizations as infallible sources of truth, thus bypassing the need for reasoned debate and critical examination. Another common logical fallacy used in media manipulation is the strawman argument, where an opposing viewpoint is misrepresented in an exaggerated or oversimplified manner to make it easier to refute. Politicians and pundits often use this tactic to discredit their opponents without addressing the substance of their arguments. A classic example of this occurred during the debates over healthcare reform in the United States, where opponents of the Affordable Care Act, ACA, frequently depicted it as a form of socialized medicine that would lead to government control over personal health decisions. By framing the issue in these extreme terms, they avoided engaging with the complex and nuanced details of the policy, instead creating a false and easily defeated version of the argument. Similarly, the ad hominem attack, another common fallacy, focuses on attacking the character of the person making an argument rather than addressing the merits of the argument itself. This tactic is often used in political campaigns, where candidates are smeared by the media in ways that detract from the issues at hand. Rather than engaging with their policies or ideas, opponents are reduced to caricatures, making it easier for the public to dismiss them without a genuine evaluation of their positions. These logical fallacies, when used in the media, are not simply rhetorical tactics, they are tools of control. They manipulate how the public perceives the issues being discussed, subtly influencing their understanding of what is rational and reasonable. The end result is that individuals may believe they are making informed decisions when in fact their reasoning has been subtly shaped by biased or manipulative media narratives. Case studies in media manipulation, historical and contemporary examples. The use of media to manipulate public perception is not a new phenomenon. Throughout history, media and propaganda have been wielded as powerful tools for controlling public opinion, shaping political outcomes, and justifying wars. The rise of mass media in the 20th century, particularly through radio, television, and print, marked a new era of manipulation. One of the most chilling examples of media manipulation in the 20th century occurred during World War II. Nazi propaganda, under the direction of Joseph Goebbels, used the media to dehumanize the Jewish population, create fear of external enemies, and foster a sense of unity and national pride. Through newspapers, films, and radio broadcasts, the Nazi regime exploited emotional appeals, logical fallacies, and selective reporting to justify its brutal policies. The manipulation of reason was part of a broader strategy to control the minds of the German people and rally them behind a genocidal ideology. More recently, the media's role in the lead-up to the Iraq War in 2003 provides a stark example of how rationality can be undermined through manipulation. The Bush administration used intelligence reports about weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, in Iraq to justify military action, presenting the case in such a way that it seemed logical and inevitable. Media outlets, particularly in the US, reinforced this narrative, presenting WMDs as an unquestionable threat and portraying the war as a necessary step to protect global security. In hindsight, we know that the intelligence was flawed and no WMDs were ever found in Iraq. But by the time the truth came out, the war was already underway, and public opinion had been shaped by a narrative that appealed to both emotion and rational logic. In the present day, social media has become a primary vehicle for media manipulation. The 2016 US presidential election demonstrated how digital platforms can be used to spread misinformation, reinforce biases, and influence voting behavior. The use of targeted ads, fake news, and sensationalist content played a pivotal role in shaping public discourse, often appealing to emotional triggers rather than reasoned arguments. In many cases, social media users were led to believe that their choices were rational, informed, and based on the facts, when in reality they were being manipulated by algorithms designed to amplify divisive content. The illusion of rational choice, a dangerous cycle. The illusion of rationality, perpetuated by media manipulation, leads us to believe that our choices are autonomous and informed when they are, in fact, often shaped by forces beyond our control. The constant bombardment of information, carefully curated to align with our biases and emotions, undermines our ability to think critically and make reasoned decisions. It creates a feedback loop in which we believe we are acting rationally, when we are, in fact, being manipulated. As long as media continues to exploit emotional appeals and logical fallacies, the true meaning of rational choice will remain elusive. And until we recognize the forces at play, we may continue to be pawns in a larger game of manipulation, our sense of reason constantly reshaped by those who hold the power to influence the narrative. In the age of ubiquitous technology and instantaneous information, the concept of rationality has been fundamentally reshaped. The promise of the internet was that it would democratize information, creating a space where individuals could make more informed, rational decisions. Yet, paradoxically, the digital age has also given rise to phenomena that have undermined the very notion of rationality itself. Echo chambers, filter bubbles, and the erosion of empathy in online discourse are just a few of the consequences of hyperrationality, where the obsession with logic, data, and reason often leads us further from the truth and from meaningful human connection. The digital age has made it easier than ever to access vast amounts of information, and the sheer volume of content available to us creates a false sense of rationality. We believe that by gathering data, analyzing facts, and consulting experts, we are engaging in rational decision-making. But as we will explore, this constant exposure to information can distort our perceptions, polarize societies, and erode the very empathy that binds us together as human beings. Echo chambers and the illusion of rational discourse. In the digital world, information is no longer a neutral force. It is filtered, curated, and shaped by algorithms that prioritize what is most likely to engage us. Social media platforms, search engines, and news websites all use complex algorithms to direct our attention to specific content based on our past behaviors, preferences, and interests. While these algorithms can be convenient, they also create what is known as echo chambers, spaces where individuals are exposed primarily to information that aligns with their existing beliefs and opinions. Echo chambers exist in online spaces where like-minded individuals gather, reinforcing each other's views without ever encountering dissenting perspectives. In these environments, the desire for validation and affirmation of our beliefs is satisfied, and we rarely confront viewpoints that challenge us. What starts as an attempt to find useful information or entertainment can quickly devolve into a self-reinforcing loop that strengthens our biases and limits our ability to engage with reality as it truly is. The consequences of echo chambers are far-reaching. When we are surrounded by voices that echo our own, we become more confident in our positions, even when they are based on faulty logic, misinformation, or half-truths. In essence, we begin to think that our own rationality is unassailable because it is constantly reaffirmed by others who think like us. This can lead to a rejection of alternative viewpoints, dismissing them as irrational, irrelevant, or even dangerous. Consider the rise of conspiracy theories on platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. When individuals fall into echo chambers, they are more susceptible to misinformation and radicalization. A belief in a flat earth, for example, may seem preposterous to many, but for those who inhabit an online community where this idea is promoted and reinforced, it can become a seemingly rational conclusion, even in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. This isn't simply about misinformation. It's about how rationality itself can be distorted when we only engage with information that confirms our biases. Filter bubbles. The algorithmic deception of choice. The concept of filter bubbles is closely related to echo chambers. Filter bubbles refer to the phenomenon where algorithms selectively present information based on our past behavior, creating a personalized information environment. While this can make our online experiences more tailored and efficient, it also has the unintended consequence of narrowing our worldview. In a filter bubble, we are exposed to a highly curated version of the world, one that reflects our preferences, past searches, and behaviors, but not necessarily the complexity or diversity of the real world. We may think we are making rational choices based on the information we have at hand, but in reality, we are only seeing a small, biased subset of the full spectrum of opinions and facts available to us. Over time, this selective exposure can reinforce our existing worldview, making it more difficult to understand or empathize with those who hold different beliefs. Take, for example, the political divide in many countries, especially in the United States. As individuals gravitate toward media outlets and online platforms that align with their political beliefs, they become trapped in filter bubbles that reinforce their political ideology. On the left, people might follow liberal news outlets or social media accounts, while on the right, people might consume conservative content. The algorithms driving these platforms learn from our behaviors and preferences, continuing to push content that aligns with our views and making us less likely to encounter alternative perspectives. This polarization results in a fragmented society where people live in different informational universes, unable to find common ground. In this environment, the pursuit of truth becomes secondary to the need for validation. We no longer seek out information that challenges us or forces us to grow. Instead, we seek comfort in the familiar. Rationality, in the traditional sense, is about considering all the available evidence and weighing it impartially. But in the digital age, filter bubbles make this process increasingly difficult, as the information we receive is tailored to fit our pre-existing assumptions. The erosion of empathy in online discourse, perhaps the most insidious consequence of hyperrationality in the digital age, is the erosion of empathy in online discourse. The rise of social media and online forums has created a new type of public sphere, where individuals can engage in debate and discussion on a vast range of topics. But while the potential for rational dialogue and meaningful exchange of ideas exists, the nature of online interactions often leads to dehumanization and the breakdown of empathy. In face-to-face conversations, we are generally more attuned to the emotional states and body language of others. Empathy rises from shared humanity. We can see the effects of our words on others and are more likely to moderate our tone accordingly. But online, the anonymity provided by screens and usernames can strip away the social cues that normally guide our behavior. As a result, we are often more likely to treat others as abstractions or opponents, rather than as complex individuals with their own emotions, experiences, and viewpoints. This dehumanization is compounded by the rapid-fire nature of online communication, where arguments are reduced to soundbites, memes, and headlines, often without the nuance and complexity needed for thoughtful discussion. When we engage in debates on social media, we are encouraged to reduce complex issues to oversimplified binaries: us versus them, right versus wrong. In this environment, empathy takes a back seat to the desire to win the argument, prove a point, or assert our intellectual superiority. In extreme cases, online discourse can lead to de-individuation, a psychological state in which individuals feel less accountable for their actions and are more likely to engage in aggressive or harmful behavior. Studies have shown that people are more likely to engage in cyberbullying, trolling, or even radical behavior online than they would in person. This is partly because the screen creates a sense of distance from others, making it easier to dismiss the humanity of those on the other side of the debate. The erosion of empathy in online spaces has profound implications for societal cohesion. When individuals stop seeing each other as human beings and instead see them as ideological opponents, the very fabric of social cooperation begins to fray. This contributes to political polarization, social fragmentation, and a decline in trust between different groups. It becomes harder to engage in meaningful dialogue or work together toward common goals when we view others not as people with valid perspectives, but as enemies to be defeated. Hyperrationality and individual well-being. While the consequences of hyperrationality in the digital age are evident on a societal level, they also affect individual well-being. The constant bombardment of information, coupled with the pressure to stay informed and make rational choices, can lead to cognitive overload and mental exhaustion. The more we immerse ourselves in online spaces, the more we become susceptible to the anxiety that comes with knowing so much, and yet being able to do so little with that knowledge. In a world that values data and information above all else, we often overlook the importance of emotional intelligence, intuition, and reflection. Hyperrationality encourages us to process the world through the lens of logic and reason alone, disregarding the more complex and nuanced aspects of human experience. As a result, we may find ourselves feeling disconnected, isolated, and even desensitized to the emotional and social needs of those around us. The pursuit of knowledge in the digital age has, paradoxically, led to a loss of meaning. As we dive deeper into the world of facts, figures, and opinions, we often forget to ask fundamental questions about the purpose of our lives and our relationships with others. In the quest to be rational, we have become increasingly detached from the emotional and ethical dimensions of our existence. Navigating the hyper-rational world as we move forward in the digital age, it is essential to recognize the ways in which hyper-rationality is shaping our lives. The allure of data and the desire for rational decision-making are powerful, but they must be tempered by an awareness of their limitations. We must learn to critically engage with the information that surrounds us, question the narratives that shape our beliefs, and recognize the emotional and psychological forces that influence our choices. Ultimately, it is not enough to simply be rational in the digital age. We must also be empathetic, reflective, and willing to engage with the world on a deeper, more human level. Only then can we hope to rebuild the social cohesion that has been fractured by the illusion of rationality in our increasingly digitized world. As we've journeyed through the intricacies of rationality, logic, and human behavior, we are left with an undeniable truth. The pursuit of knowledge, when confined to the limits of reason alone, is an incomplete one. In the age of information, where data flows freely and logic often reigns supreme, we find ourselves in a paradox. The more we cling to pure rationality, the further we drift from the fuller, richer understanding of ourselves, each other, and the world around us. To navigate the complexities of modern knowledge, where truth is not a mere accumulation of facts, but a nuanced interplay of reason, emotion, intuition, and experience, we must embrace a more holistic approach. The over-reliance on logic, as Schopenhauer and other great thinkers have shown, can blind us to the deeper truths that lie beyond the reach of pure rationality. It is in the integration of reason with emotional intelligence, empathy, and intuition that we begin to approach a more complete understanding of the world. The role of emotional intelligence in the search for truth. Emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions and the emotions of others, has long been undervalued. In the pursuit of rationality, in a world obsessed with logic and efficiency, we are often told that emotions cloud judgment, that feelings are to be set aside when making important decisions. But in reality, emotions are not mere obstacles to reason. They are integral components of the human experience and essential to navigating the world with clarity and compassion. Consider the decisions we make in our personal lives. While logic and analysis might tell us the best course of action, it is often our emotional responses that guide us to the right decision. Love, fear, joy, sorrow, these emotions provide us with insights into what matters most, what resonates with our core values, and what connects us to others. To reject emotions in favor of cold, dispassionate logic is to deny an essential part of our humanity. In fact, the most important truths we hold about relationships, community, and purpose are often discovered not through reason alone, but through our emotional and intuitive experiences. The same is true for societal decision-making. Political ideologies, economic policies, and social movements are not simply the products of rational discourse. They are deeply influenced by our collective emotions, fears, and hopes. Understanding the emotional landscape of a society is just as important as understanding the facts and figures that shape its policies. If we are to truly understand truth, we must engage not only with our intellectual faculties, but also with our emotional ones. Intuition, the unspoken knowledge. Intuition is another crucial element, often overshadowed by our obsession with rationality. Intuition is that quiet voice within us, that gut feeling, that sense of knowing that doesn't rely on step-by-step logic. It may seem irrational or unfounded, but it often leads us to insights that logic alone cannot provide. Intuition operates in the background, drawing from the vast array of experiences, knowledge, and subconscious processing that we accumulate throughout our lives. It is an internal compass, guiding us in situations where logical reasoning may be slow or incomplete. In the digital age, where information is overwhelming, intuition can help us navigate through the noise, allowing us to discern what is truly important and what is designed to mislead. Many of history's greatest breakthroughs in science, art, and philosophy were not the result of meticulous, rational deliberation alone, but emerged from moments of intuitive insight. Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, for example, was sparked by a thought experiment, a mental image of riding alongside a light beam, an intuitive leap that transcended the rigid confines of formal logic. While reason has its place, it is often intuition that leads us toward new horizons, helping us break free from the limitations of established thought. Integrating rationality, emotion, and intuition. The key to navigating the complexities of modern knowledge lies in integrating these seemingly disparate elements, rationality, emotional intelligence, and intuition, into a cohesive approach. By doing so, we can create a more complete, nuanced understanding of truth, one that honors the intellectual rigor of logic, while also embracing the wisdom of the heart and the insights of the unconscious mind. This balanced approach allows us to move beyond the polarized, binary thinking that characterizes so much of contemporary discourse. It enables us to appreciate the complexity of human experience, acknowledging that truth is not always absolute or black and white, but often a rich tapestry of multiple perspectives, emotions, and understandings. In embracing this complexity, we become more capable of empathy, more resilient in the face of uncertainty, and more effective in our pursuit of meaningful solutions to the challenges we face. This is not to say that rationality should be abandoned. Far from it. The power of logic, critical thinking, and reasoned argument is undeniable. But we must recognize that these tools are not sufficient on their own. We must complement them with the emotional and intuitive capacities that help us connect to the world in a deeper, more holistic way. The danger of over-intellectualization, our modern world. There's a tendency to intellectualize everything, to reduce complex human experiences to data points, to categorize emotions as irrational or unimportant, and to treat intuition as unreliable. This over-intellectualization can be isolating, leading us to disconnect from our own humanity and from the deeper truths of our existence. It can make us feel as though the answers to life's biggest questions lie in the realm of logic alone, when, in fact, many of those answers exist beyond reason's reach, waiting to be felt, experienced, and intuited. As we look to the future, it is crucial that we resist the temptation to treat knowledge as something purely cerebral and detached from the rest of our being. We must cultivate the capacity to reason without losing sight of the emotional and intuitive layers that add depth and richness to our understanding. Only by embracing a holistic approach to knowledge can we hope to navigate the complexities of the modern world, where truth is often obscured by noise, manipulation, and the illusion of pure rationality. A final thought: navigating the complexities of modern knowledge is not easy. It requires courage, discernment, and humility, the willingness to question our own assumptions, to confront the limitations of logic, and to embrace the mysteries of emotion and intuition. It requires us to resist the comforting pull of certainty, to acknowledge that truth is often elusive, and to recognize that our understanding of the world will always be shaped by the interplay of reason, feeling, and experience. In a world that increasingly values hyper-rationality and intellectualism, we must remind ourselves that true wisdom comes not from knowing everything, but from knowing what to seek and how to seek it. It is a quest that involves not only the mind, but also the heart and the soul. And as we embark on that journey, we must remember, the search for truth is not just about finding answers. It's about learning to ask the right questions, to listen to the deeper currents of thought and feeling, and to remain open to the mysteries that lie beyond the reach of reason. In the end, the most profound truths are often those that cannot be fully explained through logic or data alone. They are truths felt in the heart, sensed in the silence, and glimpsed in the spaces between words. To truly understand the world, we must embrace them all: the rational, the emotional, and the intuitive, and use them in harmony to navigate the labyrinth of human existence.